All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Safety Connection on temporary help agencies and the agricultural sector. My name is Megan Maris. I'm a health and safety consultant with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. And today we have Jay Rumzik, who's going to be taking you through the Safety Connection. So just a little background on Jay. He is a dedicated health and safety consultant with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, bringing over 25 years of expertise in the occupational health and safety field. That's right, 25 years of excellence, and we're not letting him go anytime soon. He is so good at what he does, we're convinced he might just be here another 25 years. So
I don't
Jay's
think so.
journey, it's a hope. I'll keep praying. So Jay's journey began with Farm Safety Association before transitioning to WSPS, where he focuses primarily on the agricultural sector. So over the years, he has gained a deep understanding of the unique challenges agricultural business owners face. His passion for agriculture actually started quite young when he took his first job as a corn detasseler at just 10 years old. Jay is deeply committed to building strong, lasting relationships with every customer, ensuring they are always built on trust and respect. So before I do go ahead and pass it over to Jay, I do have a couple housekeeping slides I'd like to go through with you. First thing I do want to mention is this session will be recorded. We will keep our microphones muted for the session as well and our cameras off. However, we do have the ability to use the chat function. So you will see a little chat icon that you can click on at the top of your taskbar, and then chat box will show up on the right side of your screen. Please feel free to participate, to type in any questions or responses as Jay is going through the content for today's session. We will, however, keep any questions for the end, so he will go ahead and answer those at that time. We do also have the opportunity to use the reactions features. So just go ahead and click on that little smiley face, and then you can choose any reaction that you'd like that's appropriate during the session. And we also will have some polls as well. So that might show up in your chat box, or it could show up just on your screen. Go ahead and click on the answer and then click on submit. We also have a couple of accessibility features for you as well. So if you'd like to turn on some live captions, you can. Just click on those three dots and that more button, and then go ahead and turn on live captions. You can also view full screen. So that view button there can be selected, and then you can go ahead and turn full screen on at that time. All right, so the purpose of these safety connections is really to provide you with an opportunity to virtually connect, to exchange ideas, share best practices on workplace health and safety topics, and learn valuable information that you can apply back at the workplace. So without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it off to Jay.
Thanks, Megan, and good morning, everybody. And we don't have a poll, but what I'd just like to ask the attendees that we do have in the session this morning, if you could use the chat function, just so I've got an idea as to who I'm speaking to. What type of operation are you joining us from? This Safety Connection is primarily geared towards, the agricultural sector. So I'm just wondering, do we got some greenhouses in the room? Do we have, some nurseries, orchards, livestock? I'll just give it a minute in the chat. So I got, there's Kelly. I know Kelly. Morning, Ziomi. We got some poultry, temporary help agency. All right. Home care. All right. Vegetable packing warehouse. All right. So we're going to go through, and thanks again, Megan, for the introduction. So the need for licensing temporary help agencies, the reason was to address a widespread violations that were found by the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development during recent inspections. And I will mention just before we continue on, we do have some representatives from the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development with us this morning, and they will be here at the end as well to answer possibly some questions that the attendees have. The report, approximately at the end of 2022, 2,300 temporary help agencies were in Ontario, okay? And what they found were many agencies were paying below minimum wage, denying basic employment rights, and in some cases withholding passports from these workers. Okay, so effective July 1st of this year, for those that aren't aware, temporary help agencies and recruiters are required to hold a license to operate. Okay, and clients, customers, firms, they are prohibited from knowingly engaging or using the services of an unlicensed temporary help agency. And you know, this was announced earlier this year that this was going to become effective July 1st. But in talking to some of my colleagues and in talking to you know, our ministry individuals prior to doing this session, you know, I was out at on an operation in August, a farm just south of London, to do a session, and was talking to the employer, and had mentioned this about you know, the licensing requirements for temporary help agencies, and this particular owner was not aware of this. So, you know, need to spread the word, right, within the agricultural sector, that if we are going to be using temporary help agencies, that those owners are aware, employers are aware that there is a requirement to ensure that that agency is licensed and that they, the client, is prohibited from knowingly engaging or using that service. Now, what the ministry has done is they're maintaining a website with key licensing information. Now, again, this PowerPoint presentation will not be shared following the session. It is being recorded, but someone from WSPS will be sending out a resource email to all of the attendees, and this particular link that you see on the screen will be included. And this allows individuals that, if they're considering using a temporary help agency or a recruiter, to go to the website, and this will provide you with, as you see the details below, the license holders and their status, okay? Terms and conditions of the recruiter's license, information on possibly, you know, applicants or a temporary help agency that is seeking a license, and then additional information under the Employment Standards Act and particular regulations. So who needs a license? Okay, well, two, temporary help agencies and recruiters, and we're gonna walk through you know, the definitions of the two here. So a temporary help agency is an employer that employs persons for the purpose of assigning them to perform work on a temporary basis for clients of the employer. Okay. And very important here for, you know, if there are temporary help agencies in the session this morning, licensing requirements applies to agencies both within and outside Ontario if they assign employees to work in Ontario. Okay, so very important, right? That if it is outside Ontario that the agency is set up, but they're assigning employees to work in Ontario, they are required to ensure, right, that they do have a license and they're registered with the Ministry of Labor. Now, a recruiter is a person which includes, could be a corporation, partnership, an individual, sole proprietorship, who, for a fee, finds or attempts to find employment, whether the employment is temporary or permanent, okay, in Ontario, for prospective employees, or finds or attempts to find employees to be employed on a temporary or permanent basis, okay, for, again, employers in Ontario. But it does not include the following, of which we're going to go through here. An employee who performs the functions described above as a duty of the employee's position, an employer who finds or attempts to find employees to be employed by the employer, certain educational institutions that find or attempt to find employment in Ontario for its students or alumni, a trade union, a registered charity, okay, A person who finds or attempts to find employment in Ontario for prospective employees who are eligible to receive services and supports under the Services and Supports to Promote the Social Inclusion of Persons with Development Disabilities Act of 2008, and who receiving funding to purchase those services and supports in accordance with a program funded by the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. Okay. Or as well, doesn't find or attempt to find employment in Ontario for prospective employees except in those circumstances. Okay, so those are for temporary help agencies and recruiters. Okay, additionally, a person is party to an agreement with the government, federal, provincial, or municipal to find or attempt to find employment in Ontario for prospective employees, or to find or attempt to find employees for prospective employers in Ontario, okay, does not perform these functions outside of those government agreements, okay? And there may very well be some, questions in regards to, these definitions that if you do have questions, our colleagues from the ministry will be able to answer at the end of the session, okay? The licensing requirements for temporary help agencies and recruiters, okay? Every legal entity operating as a temporary help agency or acting as a recruiter must apply for a license, okay? Legal entities treated as one employer under Section 4 of the Employment Standards Act must apply separately. If a legal entity both operates a temporary help agency and acts as a recruiter, it must submit two separate applications, okay? One to operate as the temporary help agency and one to act as the recruiter. This became effective, kicked in July 1st of this year, okay? And starting July 1st, you are prohibited from operating as a temporary help agency or acting as a recruiter unless the transitional rule applies. And what is the transitional rule? Well, if you submitted your application before July 1st of this year and have not received the decision on your application from the ministry by July 1st, you are allowed to continue to operate as a temporary help agency or act as a recruiter on and after July 1st, okay? This applies until the ministry notifies you either that a license has been issued or that the application for a license has been refused. Applications submitted on or after July 1st, okay, are prohibited from operating as a temporary help agency or acting as a recruiter unless the ministry, again, has issued that license, okay? And there are consequences for violations, okay? Enforcement actions may include the following, okay? Compliance orders, monetary penalties, and possibly prosecution, okay? Now, the application. The following list provides some examples of the information and documentation needed to complete your application. Contact information, including email addresses for one or more individuals who may be contacted if the ministry has questions in regards to the application. The address of each location where the applicant carries on business inside and outside of Canada. If the applicant is a corporation, the name and address of each corporate officer, and director. And if the applicant is a partnership, the name and address of each partner, okay, for the application. For those that aren't aware, there is a security requirement. An initial license requirement, okay? A temporary help agency applying for an initial license must provide a $25,000 security deposit to the Director of Employment Standards, okay? From a renewal license requirement, if the Director of Employment Standards already holds a $25,000 security deposit from that agency, no additional security is required when renewing the license. Okay, so very important for those to be aware, if we are a temporary help agency, that when applying, there is a requirement to have that $25,000 security deposit. Okay. Exemptions in regards to the requirement. Okay, a security deposit is not required for a recruiter's application if the applicant will not recruit foreign national workers during the licensing term, Okay, or the applicant will recruit foreign nationals, but only for positions with wages at or above the median hourly wage. And what is the median hourly wage? Okay, well, the median hourly wage as of April 2nd, 2024 is in Ontario $28.39 per hour. Okay. For foreign nationals, an individual who is not a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident as defined by the Federal Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And the median hourly wage for Ontario as published on the Government Canada website, okay, as I just mentioned, as of the application submission date, and again, April 2nd, $28.39 per hour in Ontario. There were two workplace injuries that occurred, and one was involving temporary help agencies, but we did have one in Listowel where the fine was $55,000. And then there was one down in Leamington that was $75,000. So that's some information in regards to the licensing requirements for both temporary help agencies and recruiters as to what they are required to do in regards to applying for that license and work that needs to be done with the ministry. The focus of today's session is temporary help agencies and the agricultural sector. And there are various firms, clients that I work with that from time to time will have to reach out to a temporary help agency and possibly say, I need 10 workers for the next 7 days during the peak of harvest. And the question a lot of the times from those employers is, Jay, who ultimately is responsible for training? Or the comments that I've heard from time to time, well, they're only coming in for 2 days, like, nothing's going to happen. I don't really have time to be, providing them with some type of training or orientation. And this is where it gets into farming operations and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And what I'm telling those employers is ultimately they are responsible to ensure that some type of training is being provided to those temporary help agency workers that may be coming in. The Occupational Health and Safety Act, in regards to the agricultural sector, farming operations came under the Act effective June 30th of 2006. So as Megan alluded to, yes, I have been doing this for 25 plus years. And I started in 99, in July of 99, with one of the legacy health and safety associations, and that was Farm Safety Association. And when I would go out to farms from July of 99 till June 29th of 2006, and promote safety to those employers and their staff, there was really no legal requirement for that employer to provide types of training or take us up on our offer to conduct a safety session with their staff. But effective June 30th of 2006, now agricultural operations and employers, they have duties and responsibilities under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Now, the exemption, just so everybody is clear and aware of this, the Green Book or the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regs 414, okay, does not apply to farming operations run by self-employed individuals without paid workers. So as an example, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I'm staffing the booth at the Canada's Outdoor Farm Show, and there was one individual that come up to the booth and we began to talk, and he wanted to know, does the Occupational Health and Safety Act pertain to my farm? And I asked the question, well, do you have any paid employees? Do you pay any staff members? And the answer was no. And I said, well, in that particular case, then no, the Occupational Health and Safety Act does not pertain to your operation. But just to be aware that if by chance or whatever, he happened to be in a pinch and he needed to reach out and hire someone, or he was going to reach out to a temporary help agency, when those paid workers are coming onto his operation, that is when, right, the Occupational Health and Safety Act would apply. Okay. We talk about regularly employed. The number of workers that are employed for a period that exceeds 3 months. Okay. Now, this could be permanent full-time staff. Okay. Permanent part-time staff. We're talking about contract staff that come in. Okay. So we're the use of, let's say, temporary help agency workers, seasonal workers that could possibly come in through the AgStream program. I know a number of businesses use the AgStream program and will be bringing in those seasonal workers or the temporary foreign agricultural workers. We're talking about managers as well as supervisors. Okay. Now, for the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the farming regulations that apply, 414, okay, you're going to notice two things here. We have unregulated hazards, hazards that could be found within the agricultural sector that are not covered by specific regulations, okay, and then non-sector specific workplaces, hazards in the workplaces not covered by a sector specific regulation. And I'm going to speak to these regulations in the next slide. But I think it's very important for our attendees to understand that top bullet point, 25(2)H, the general duty clause. This is an employer's responsibility, section 25(2)H, that it is the employer's responsibility to ensure that he or she takes every precaution reasonable for the protection of their workers. And just before I segue into the key regulations that could pertain to agricultural sectors, a lot of the times when I'm doing other sessions, whether I'm doing virtual training, I'll pose that question to my attendees, my participants. The general duty clause, to take every precaution reasonable for the protection of the worker. What do you think that means? And I've said to them, you essentially want to look at the possible hazards that could be at your business and think, what's the worst possible case scenario that could occur? And when we think about workplaces and we think about hazards and we think about the worst possible case scenario that could occur, well, the worst possible case scenario that could occur could result in a fatality. And a number of years ago, I was on site and I was conducting a safety audit or a walkthrough with an employer, and I was pointing out some things and trying to relay to him, we need to consider this type of training. And his response to me was, what are you, a fearmonger? Like, do you literally walk around every day and think worst case scenario? And my reply back to him was, Henry, if I'm not doing that, I'm not doing my job. Okay. We want to think about what are the hazards that are within our particular workplace and how have we implemented controls or put preventative measures in place to protect those workers. So when we talk about key regulations, for a farm, 414 is going to pertain, okay? Regulation 297 is going to apply. That is your occupational health and safety awareness training. Some may know that as your mandatory worker or your mandatory supervisor awareness training, and that kicked in July 1st of 2014. That is a one-time thing. Previously there used to be books that you could order from the ministry. Everything is gravitated to moving online. There is there's an online awareness session as well for worker and supervisor on the ministry's website. 381 is noise. The noise regulation now pertains to the agricultural sector. 420 is your notices and reports. So notices and reports would be, you are required to report a fatality to the ministry. You are required to report a critical injury to the ministry. Okay, severe loss of blood. The injury produces unconsciousness. Fracture of an arm or a leg. Okay, but not a finger or toe. Naloxone kits. Now that regulation pertains. Okay. Reg 1101, which is your WSIB first aid requirements. Now, you'll notice there's an asterisk there. Okay. Regulation 213 is for construction, okay? And it's pointing out there, it's only applicable during a construction project on a farming operation. So if I have, as an example, a large cash crop farm, or I have a large greenhouse, right? The growing of the crop or the growing of the tomatoes, the cukes, or the peppers, we know that that's going to fall under 414. But if I've contracted out someone to come in and build a new barn, or I've contracted out to have someone come in and build a new phase of the greenhouse, it's that particular area where the construction or the building's being done, that during the time frame of the building occurring, Reg 213 is going to pertain. Okay? And that's very important for individuals to understand, because a number of years ago, when the Working at Heights training standard came into play, that primarily pertains to the construction sector. And I was having a conversation a number of years ago with an employer that had said, Jay, what's new in regards to, legislation? And we started to have that conversation in regards to, Working at Heights. And I said, but it pertains to construction. It's at the farm, even though you've got silos, right? Best practice would be to provide that training to, your staff that are going to be accessing, the silos or the grain elevators. But this conversation shifted because then he had said, well, we're building, a new barn later this summer. And I know when I worked on the farm, during university summers, this was common practice at this particular business where I was at, that, the owner would reach out to a local contractor to say, I need a new barn built. What's the cost going to be? Oh, and by the way, I'm going to provide you with 3 or 4 of my staff to assist in the building of the barn. And this is what this individual had mentioned that they were going to be doing. And I said, yes, but as soon as you provide, your staff to that particular contractor for the construction of that particular barn, now it's going to fall under Reg 213, and there would be a requirement to ensure that those workers that you're going to be providing to the contractor have received the Working at Heights training. And his comment was, well, how much does that cost? And I told him, the estimated cost. And he said, well, we're just going to ensure, right, that we're not going to be providing those workers, right? We will inform the contractor to do that. Another one that's not on here, but I'll just mention it just so everybody is aware. We get into Reg 851 for industrial establishments. Okay, and for greenhouses, the work that I've done with greenhouses, over the years down in the Leamington and Kingsville area, this becomes very important to understand. If I have a greenhouse and I have a pack house, right, and I am packing my own product, that entire facility, the greenhouse ranges, the pack house, that falls under 414. It's very important to be aware that if I do have a pack house and I'm packing product for another grower, it is not my greenhouse range, right, that falls under Reg 851 for industrial establishments. The growing of the crop will fall under Reg 414. But as soon as I begin to bring in another grower's product to pack that product for them, my pack house now would fall under Reg 851, okay? So regulations that pertain are on that slide. The asterisk is, if construction is being done, 213 would pertain for the duration of the construction project. And one to be aware of is as well, from time to time, or possibly if I am packing another grower's product, Reg 851 could pertain, okay? Now, tips for working with temporary help agencies. There was a commodity association earlier on this year that had reached out, and they were getting a lot of questions from their membership as to who is responsible for the training, Again, I've alluded to it. I said it earlier. Oh, I'm only bringing them in for a couple of days. Nothing's going to happen. Okay. And when I was having that conversation with this particular individual, I said, ultimately, it is the employer's responsibility to ensure that training has been conducted. Okay. And as it's saying here, if the agency provides health and safety training before workers arrive, it can save time. I have had some farms that have said to the temporary help agencies that they're working with in the past, if we are going to work together and you have your pool of people, I, as the employer, will provide you with our training, certain types of training to the temporary help agency to say, I need you to go through this information with your workers prior to them being sent out to the business. But we need to verify the quality of the training. There needs to be a check on the back end when those workers, right, do arrive at the farm. Is it the employer? Is it the supervisor that's checking with those workers? Because we know very well that those workers could fluctuate, from day to day, from week to week. But we also need to ensure that there's documentation. You gotta have some type of documentation. If you don't have the documentation, you essentially don't have the proof. Okay. Site specific. Okay. The temporary help agency could provide a WHMIS overview, but if I am going to be having workers from that particular help agency working with WHMIS controlled products at my business, then I need to ensure that it's site specific. Okay, so site specific in the sense, this is the product that you're going to be working with. This is where the safety data sheet is located. This is where the emergency eye wash or the emergency shower is located. This is the required PPE. Okay, but these are things that employers can consider, that if they're going to be working with a temporary help agency and they're attempting to try and save time, to have that set up in advance, but to ensure that there is some type of follow-up. Follow-up in the sense that it's been done, as I said earlier, that there is that check, okay, and to ensure that it's documented, right, and that it did actually take place. We also need to consider too, when we're working with, temporary help agencies and my clients that I work with that, bring workers through, the AgStream program, this is a challenge as well that, if I'm bringing workers in from, Jamaica, well, we don't have a language barrier there, but if I'm bringing workers in from Mexico, possibly we don't have someone on staff that speaks Spanish. Okay, so things to consider. Ensure training is in a language workers understand. Okay, if workers have limited English skills, translating training materials and important information. We're going to share some resources later, but on the WSPS website, on the agricultural horticultural landing page, they're called safety topics. And all of our safety topics sheets that are geared towards the agricultural sector are in English, French, and Spanish. We talk here about additional support, and I've seen this firsthand. There's a couple of sessions, whatever, that I do, every year where I go out and I'll be doing the safety awareness session with the staff, but that safety awareness session is going to take a little bit longer. Because the employers reached out and they've hired an interpreter. So, I do my little piece, right? Do a stop. She translates, right? To ensure that those workers, totally understand that. Pictograms has become very important as well. Using, universal pictograms, so whether it's a slip, trip, or fall, whether it's contact with machinery. And I'll speak to the mentor in a second, but just in regards to the interpreter, two things that I can share. We know that in the agricultural sector, there's some businesses that are required to have a joint health and safety committee, and based off of the numbers that joint health and safety committee is required to be certified. But I had an interesting one a couple years ago where I was doing a Cert Part 2 agricultural session. That's a 2-day course. I was doing it on site, and I was informed well in advance. We are going to have workers that Spanish is their primary language in the session. We've arranged for somebody to be in the room with you that had a little lapel mic, and those Spanish workers that were in the session had headphones. And as I was speaking, he was quietly translating into the lapel mic, and then those attendees, it was translating and they were understanding. The other thing that I noticed, and I began to share this with some of my clients that I call upon on a regular basis that are bringing in workers that English isn't their first language, it was on the second day that I'm doing the session, and I noticed that in the morning, the ladies that had the headphones on and the translation was being conducted, every once in a while when I would turn around, they'd have their phone up. And they had their phone, and they were pointing their phone at the slide on the screen. And I ended up asking the primary contact at break, what are the ladies doing? And she said, oh, they're using their phone to translate your slide that's in English into Spanish, right? So those are tips to consider in regards to if you do have language issues. And not only, we have supervisors, we have managers, we have crew leaders that those workers would be, instructed that if they have any issues to report that to your supervisor or come to your employer. But one client a number of years ago, and I was like, that's fantastic. I need to share that with, the other businesses that are bringing in workers through the AgStream program. And where I'm going with this is this particular business has approximately 6 bunkhouses that house their temporary foreign agricultural workers. And the owners changed it a couple of years ago, where before it used to be, the individuals that are coming in on a regular basis, they've been coming back to the farm for close to 15, 20 years. They're in bunkhouse number 1, right? They all know each other, and they've been coming here. We used to house them in bunkhouse number 1. And then you'd have the new workers, first time here coming to Ontario to work on the farm. They had never been, they're in, bunkhouse number 6. But what this particular business started to do was to intermingle, right? To have some of the seasoned workers in a bunkhouse with some of the, the newly arrived workers, again, first time them coming here. And, they have their supervisor, but those new workers were instructed or informed that, this individual, let's say Roy will be, Roy has been coming to the farm for 20 plus years. He is kind of acting as the mentor or the guide for those new workers and pointing out, right? Hazards and possibly assisting with the training. Okay. So types of training. Okay. I kind of alluded to it when I was speaking to, WHMIS site specific, emergency response. Okay, so where is the location of the emergency eye wash station? Okay, what about an emergency shower station if it's there? Okay, the mustering area. Okay, if there's a fire or an explosion, where do we want everyone to gather? Okay, where's the location of the fire extinguisher? And this possibly could be something that, you are going to have to do on site, right? I mean, this could be communicated through the temporary help agency, but this could be the workers arrive that particular day. I'm going to need to take, 15, 20 minutes to gather those workers around and do a quick walkthrough to say, this is where these things are located. Okay. First aid requirements. Where are the first aid kits? Okay. Who are the individuals on site that are certified first aiders? Okay. First aid trained. Okay. This has become a challenge. Okay. There's a lot of sessions that I'll do that the owner will say, Jay, can you speak to cell phones? Okay. Cell phones are very useful, right? I mean, cell phones, possibly the supervisor needs to have the cell phone in the field to communicate back to the office with the employer, right? But more and more, there's been a lot of businesses that have, implemented some type of internal cell phone policy. I'm not saying you can't bring your cell phone to work, but we don't want you on the cell phone when you're working. Feel free to use it at break. Feel free to use it at lunch. Okay. But we don't want you using the cell phone while, let's say, possibly operating a piece of equipment or working in the field. Okay. It becomes a distraction. It also becomes a productivity issue, okay? But possibly those cell phones that those workers have are very important because then, as one business that I just happened to visit in August, and for those that aren't familiar, I'm quite familiar with it, but WhatsApp, they have a WhatsApp group messaging system, and they don't instruct their workers. They say, if you're comfortable, we'll put everybody on this WhatsApp group message. And as she had mentioned, right, it became very useful earlier in the year when there was the threat of severe weather, that when that warning for the particular county popped up, they instantaneously were able to get that message out to the workers in the field and say, severe thunderstorm warning, we want everybody out of the field. Okay. So, each business, right, it's going to vary as to what their internal cell phone policy or rules are, but that needs to be communicated to those temporary help agency workers. And as well, what are the personal protective equipment requirements? Is there a requirement to, if I'm going to be working on the farm, to have steel-toed footwear? Is there a requirement for hearing protection to be worn, or eye protection, or possibly, gloves? Or if I'm working with, women's control products, there's going to be more, more personal protective equipment to be required to be used when handling those particular products, right? As well, this is one that you need to ensure, right, that if the temporary help agency has those workers that could be coming to your business, we need to ensure, the top two, that Ministry of Labor, Immigration Training and Skills Development, worker awareness training, as well as the supervisor. And I know it's been, as I just said, July 1st of 2014, but there was a meeting earlier, it was actually last year, and our West team had gone down to Leamington, and we had two inspectors from the Windsor office in our meeting. And they were just kind of sharing types of orders that had been left in the Windsor, Essex area. And I was kind of dumbfounded when I saw the number come up where they had been to businesses, and that was one of the orders, that not all staff at the particular business had received the worker awareness training. Okay. So again, if the temporary help agency is, has those workers, you can put them through that course online. A certificate is issued, right? I've instructed employers that if you're putting your workers through it, have them, at the end, print off two certificates, one for themselves and one for you to keep on file. But if the agency can provide that certificate, that's one less thing that agricultural employer needs to do, because there's the proof that training has been done, right? And also, workplace violence and harassment. That could be the employer, sending that over, or that could be the employer when the staff arrives, to ensure whatever that it's been communicated to them. We do have a violence policy. We do have a harassment policy. It's zero tolerance. And if you feel that you're being harassed or a violent situation was to occur, this is who you will report it to while you're on site at our particular business. Okay, so those are things to consider in regards to, training tips for those workers if we're working with temporary help agencies. And I would also say, though, too, this type of training, this is for your own staff as well, to ensure, right, that individuals sometimes will ask, what types of training should I do, on an annual basis? I know some of the businesses here in the room, you more than likely got, some type of health and safety orientation that you run your new workers through. But there's other businesses though too, they'll put them through that, but they have like, annual refreshers, right? And maybe it's not the full blown, whether it's 2 hours, 2.5 hours, violence and harassment training, but maybe it's just a quick little refresher session, or it's a toolbox talk or a tailgate talk, just to kind of remind, right? Those workers, of that the policies, protocols, or procedures that are in place at our particular business. Right? So we have 3 basic rights under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And if you go through the mandatory worker awareness training provided by the Ministry of Labor, these 3 rights are touched upon. But whether it's our internal workers, whether it's temporary help agency workers, as a worker, right, in Ontario, we have the right to know. We have the right to know about hazards, okay, at the particular workplace where we're gonna be working, right? So hazards, okay. Am I going to be exposed to noise? Okay. Am I going to be exposed to noise? I know that there's a noise regulation. Am I going to be provided with personal protective equipment? Okay. We got mobile equipment. We have tractors. We have forklifts. We have scissor carts. Okay. Again, right? Maybe some businesses have this set up. Okay. We have dedicated, designated staff that will operate. Okay. The scissor cart, the forklift, the tractor. Okay. Still though, right? We have that equipment on site. We need to ensure that those workers that maybe won't be using that equipment are aware that that equipment is there. Okay. And what are the potential hazards? Okay. We have the right to participate. We have the right to participate, and it says there to be part of the process of recognizing, assessing, and controlling hazards. Okay? So workers, if you do a hazard assessment, okay, if you do a hazard assessment or a hazard identification risk assessment, workers can be involved in that. Okay, but the right to participate primarily when I'm out and I'm talking to attendees, individuals, it kind of narrows down into the health and safety representative or the Joint Health and Safety Committee. Okay, and I'll speak to what are the requirements for reps and committees, but they're involved, right, to identify hazards within the workplace and kind of act as a liaison between the employer and the other workers. And we have the right to refuse unsafe work. Okay, and it's always funny. I'm out and I'll say, "Hey, does anyone know the three basic rights?" And I always get we have the right to refuse work. And I say, no, it's not the right to refuse work. It's the right to refuse unsafe work. Okay. If you've got a worker, if there's a worker there that feels uncomfortable being asked to do something, or there's a guard missing, or, hey, I need you to jump on that forklift and load that trailer, when the worker's never been provided with, any type of forklift training, okay, that could be something where the worker could invoke, right, his or her right to refuse unsafe work. Okay, but there's a full formal procedure, right, where they got to tell the supervisor. Okay, that worker has to report that to the supervisor, right, and the supervisor would investigate that. And our rep, okay, or our worker representative on the committee, they would be involved in that. But those are the 3 basic rights. Okay, and it's interesting, everybody, for those in the agricultural sector. As I said, June 30th, 2006. That's when farms come under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. I mentioned this earlier. I worked on the farm for 4 summers while I was in university, and then I worked on that farm for 1 full year before I got the job at Farm Safety. Those 3 rights that I'm looking at right now, when I was on that farm from, that would have been 98, right, of May until July of 99, I did not have those 3 basic rights. In the agricultural sector, those 3 basic rights, okay, did not pertain. I remember taking a call early on from an employee at a hog operation and explained the situation that he was going through and said to me, "Jay, do I have the right to invoke my right to refuse unsafe work. And I had to sit on the other end of the phone and tell that individual, no, you do not. You can't invoke your right to refuse unsafe work. And we had a discussion on, like, what's more important here? Your life is more important than you going back into that barn based off of what you've told me you've been exposed to. But now all workers in the agricultural sector have those 3 basic rights. Okay? Now, there are some exemptions in the agricultural sector. You'll see on the right-hand side, there are 6 businesses or 6 subsectors that are listed there. Beef, dairy, greenhouse, hog, mushroom, poultry. Okay? If any of those 6 have more than 6 workers, let's say they fall into 6 to 19, they are required to have a health and safety representative. That health and safety representative must be a worker. I want to stress this to everybody in the session. That individual must be a worker. They cannot be anybody that holds managerial functions. They can be elected amongst their fellow workers, or they can volunteer. That rep cannot be appointed by the employer. Now, if I have 20 to 49 workers of the 6 that are listed there, I am required to have a joint health and safety committee. That joint health and safety committee must be made up of 1 part management and 1 part worker. The worker, again, representative, can volunteer or be elected amongst their fellow workers, cannot be appointed by the employer. The management representative, however, can be appointed by the employer. Those 2 members that are on that committee, they are not required to be certified. Certified means you or those individuals going through certification part 1, which is 3 days, and certification part 2, sector specific, which is 2 days. So a total of 5 days. And to maintain your certification status, you are required to take a refresher course once every 3 years. Okay? But the certification only pertains to those 6 where we must have a worker representative and a management representative that's certified if I have more than 50 workers. And that's when my committee needs to ensure that it has 2 management representatives, 2 worker representatives, of which 1 worker and 1 management representative is certified. And one thing that I would share in regards to the businesses, we'll see it here on the next slide, okay? Of those 6 that are listed, beef, dairy, greenhouse, hog, mushroom, and poultry, those are the only 6 that are required to have a joint health and safety committee. Okay, so if I am a large cash crop farm, if I'm an orchard, if I'm a nursery, and I have 22 workers as an example, the legislative requirement is to ensure that I have only a health and safety representative. Okay, and there it is. Okay, so cash crop, nurseries, and orchards. Okay. And a lot of the times we'll get a question in regards to mixed operations. I'm cash crop, but I'm also dairy. Well, is it 2 separate businesses? Okay. Because then that we need to, if it is strictly just it's a custom farming cash crop business, okay, well then, rep. But dairy, right? A lot of the times we can go into WSIB, we can look at the codes that the board has, and it'll determine what that business is. But I'll just speak the one thing in regards to the health and safety rep. Over the years, I've had a lot of businesses reach out and they're saying, I'm having a tough time, right? Trying to get somebody, I keep holding these meetings. Does anyone want to volunteer? Does anyone want to, let their name stand, and they can't get a rep? And I think what it is sometimes is it's not fully properly communicated as to what are the functions and duties of the health and safety rep. And as you can see here in the next slide, right? Well, they're required to conduct monthly workplace inspections. If we're going in to do a noise assessment, I go out and do noise assessments, then I need to have the health and safety representative or the worker representative from the Joint Health and Safety Committee present prior to the testing being conducted. Okay, they can make recommendations to the employer, participate in the investigation of work refusals. They can inspect the site of a critical injury or fatality. But a lot of the times, I think some individuals feel that they're hesitant to let their name stand to become the rep because they feel that it's all on their shoulders. And I've tried to stress to those individuals, and I've had those discussions that when you're conducting that monthly workplace inspection, that's a snapshot in time. That's the hazards that you see today. Okay. So if you happen to miss something and there's other workers within close proximity, they need to understand that they don't go, oh, well, look what Jay missed. Hopefully he picks that up during his November inspection. No, one of two things. They need to understand that they need to report that to their supervisor, or they could come up to me and say, Jay, did you not see that guard, right, is missing off that piece of machinery? Okay. So it doesn't all fall on their shoulders, right? I mean, they have a set role, but it speaks to what we'll talk here in a couple of slides, the internal responsibility system, right? The committee, right? If there is a requirement to have a committee, again, they have to conduct those monthly workplace inspections. Excuse me. They have to meet on a quarterly basis. It's representation from both management and the workers. They're an advisory body, okay? But when we talk about the internal responsibility system, obviously the employer has the most responsibility, okay? He or she is required to ensure that the program's in place. It starts at the top, right? You got to have buy-in from the top and it cascades down. Supervisors become the eyes and ears of the employer when the employer's not around. Okay. Point is, employer has a policy in place that says eye protection is required. Supervisor sees a worker working in the maintenance shop not wearing their eye protection. Supervisor can't just turn a blind cheek or turn the other way. Supervisor's got a duty and responsibility, to go over to the worker and say, hey, I need you to put your eye protection on. Workers, they got to comply. Boss puts the policy in place. Worker has a legal duty and responsibility to comply with that. This is the required PPE that must be worn. This is our internal cell phone policy. When you're operating the forklift, when you're operating the tractor, okay, seat belts are required, right? Unless the roll bar has been folded down. But the committee and the rep, they're monitoring that. They're monitoring the system, right? They're conducting those monthly workplace inspections, okay? Acting as a liaison. I've always said to, workers in sessions, you should always feel comfortable to be able to go to your employer if you have a health and safety related issue or concern, or you could go to your supervisor. But sometimes maybe workers don't feel comfortable in going to the employer or the supervisor. That's where they could take that concern to the worker representative, right, on the committee, or go to the health and safety rep, right? And there's always the concern. It's going to be expressed, anonymously, right? So workers need to understand that, or whatever, that if they're going to the rep, right, that the rep is just going to take the concern, right, to the employer, right? They're not going to be saying it was Jay Remzik that expressed this particular concern, right? And then there becomes more of that comfort level. Okay? Posting requirements. It's interesting at the Outdoor Farm Show, we had in our booth, I put together a sample health and safety board. What is required to be up on the board? And we actually had that poster that you're looking at. We had those. I was able to hand those away, as well as the Form 82 poster. But it was interesting, the amount of people that come up and looked at the board and said, I've got that and I've got that, but I don't have all the other stuff. And I was like, well, that is a requirement, right? So we need to have a copy of our Occupational Health and Safety Act. Okay, you can get an Occupational Health and Safety Act and farming regulations booklet. I think on Service Ontario, I think it's about $8. I need to have a health and safety policy. Policy needs to be posted on the board. Policy needs to be signed by the most senior person, and it needs to be dated. Violence and harassment policies, both signed by the most senior person and dated. The Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development on their website, and I've got the links and I send them out all the time to clients. I had a couple of people that approached the booth and I handed them my business card and said, just send me an email and I'll send you, the mandatory postings requirement email that I send out all the time. And they've got, a sample violence policy, sample harassment policy, and sample health and safety policy, right? You need to have that poster. Any orders, right? If the ministry's been in. If you do have a committee, there's a requirement to have the names and work locations of the Joint Health and Safety Committee members. And the annual summary, if requested by WSIB, that's the committee can request that of the employer, and that would be posted on the Health and Safety Board. As well as, this becomes very important, any records of any monitoring, so indoor air quality as an example, warning signs for hazardous physical agents, so you're seeing that sign there for hearing protection. Not a lot of places per se as a whole, but I know for a fact some of the greenhouses that I've been down to in Leamington and Kingsville, you get into the box making area. The one that I'm thinking of, before you walk through that door, there's signage posted on outside the door that says beyond this point, hearing protection is required, because it is higher than 85 decibels for those individuals as they're working through their shift, because the noise regulation is 85 decibels over 8 hours. So if I'm working in an area for 8 hours and it's a constant 85 or higher dB, then there becomes a requirement to ensure that hearing protection is worn, but there also becomes a requirement to ensure that I've got that signage, okay? And then the employment standards in Ontario poster, okay? And then from WSIB's standpoint, you got to have the 1, 2, 3, 4 poster. So this is the in case of injury at work poster. Copies of the valid first aid certificates of those individuals that have been trained. And then inspection cards of the first aid kits, okay? And those first aid kits under Regulation 1101, they're required to be inspected on a quarterly basis. But what I find is most businesses, whether it's the rep, health and safety rep, or whether it's the worker representative, on their monthly workplace inspection template that they've, designed or customized, they've instructed, those individuals, we want the kits inspected, on a monthly basis, right? And I'm sure some attendees probably have these in your kits, but that's like a first aid log, right? That you've instructed your workers that, hey, if you're going to take a bandage out of the out of the first aid kit, we want like a log filled out. And it's interesting, over the years doing, compliance audits, and you go out to businesses and you'll look at that, in the first aid log, maybe the first 2 lines, they've been filled out completely. And then you get to like line 3 and it's like, J, bandage. Okay, well, like what date did that occur? Okay. But very important for the workers to understand that, if they were to seek medical assistance from a healthcare practitioner, doctor, walk-in clinic, going to the hospital for a work-related injury, very, very important for them to understand that they need to notify the employer, because then the employer has a responsibility and a requirement to ensure that the Form 7, right, is submitted to WSIB. So we are going to send out, we're going to walk through some of the resources, but that's going to be sent to you in an email following the session. But complementary consulting. And what that means is I'm always amazed sometimes that, and I had this discussion a couple of times at the show, that employers don't necessarily know how the whole system works. That you've got the ministry that handles the enforcement, you got WSIB that is the insurance carrier, and then you've got these health and safety associations. Well, WSPS looks after everybody that is agriculture, manufacturing, and the service sector. And as employers, if you have workers, you're required to be registered with WSIB, and you're required to submit premium payments. Well, within the system, a portion of your premium payments go from WSIB to the Ministry of Labor, and then the Ministry of Labor hands those over to the 4 designated health and safety associations, and that's called the transfer payment agreement. But if there's a business out there, let's say there's a greenhouse or a farm somewhere that you mentioned noise and the noise regulation. I don't know if it's really, really loud in here. Could someone come out and maybe kind of tell me, yeah, you definitely need to have hearing protection worn in this particular area. There's services that WSPS offers that they're free of charge, right? So we as consultants, right, throughout the province, we can come out to businesses, and I've always kind of segued it this way, that you're willing to take the notes, right? Or you just want some advice, there's no cost for that. Right. But if you need myself or some other colleagues to, come out for a noise assessment and have to rent equipment, and you want an actual report, well, then there does become, a fee for service. I know one of my colleagues on the team, he's an ergonomist, and I was doing a session a number of years ago down at Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers in their boardroom, and he come in for just the morning, but just to kind of explain what he does and introduce himself. And that triggered, him getting a number of calls from the attendees after the fact saying, hey, can you come out to my, can you have a look at this pack line from an ergonomic standpoint? Can you possibly make some verbal recommendations? We'll take notes. And he was able to do that. Training, we provide training, CERT Part 1, CERT Part 2, but just another discussion that I had with another individual at the show, and they said they were being constantly hounded by an outside consulting company saying, you're required to do this training, this training, this training, this training. And I put her mind at ease and said, well, technically, those two types of training, that doesn't necessarily pertain to the agricultural sector, but it would be best practice. But I also said, you don't need to use them. There's tools and resources that we have on our website that you could use. You could download. You could use that tailgate sheet as your resource. You could communicate that to your staff. You would have an attendance sheet, the date, the individuals that were there, the approximate time, have them sign off on that. You take your attendance sheet, you take that tailgate sheet as the resource, stapled together, there's your documentation, okay? And another one that's on there is the WSIB Health and Safety Excellence Program. And it's just letting you know, sometimes businesses, they're not aware as to what they're required to do. Having policies, having procedures, but this is a voluntary incentive program that allows you to, work on topics, create policies, procedures, implement that within your business, provide training to your staff. It is then validated by the WSIB, but there's the potential to get a rebate based off of, the amount of premiums that you pay. And as a colleague was, telling some people about that at the show, said, hey, you're already doing this anyways. Why don't sign up for the program and then get some of these, the rebate, right? As an incentive for completing these. Okay. So as I had mentioned, this will be included. There is, the worker health and safety awareness training that's on the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development's website. A couple of e-courses that WSPS offers. There's one in regards to WHMIS. Again, just so everybody is clear, Regulation 860 does not pertain to the agricultural sector. But as I've always told clients, there's always a but. Okay, we all know that in the agricultural sector, there are lots of women's controlled products that are used. God forbid, if something was to happen to a worker, the ministry can't come in and charge that farm against 860, but they would more than likely charge against the general duty clause, section 25(2)(h). And as I said to employers, how would you demonstrate that you took every precaution reasonable, even though it doesn't pertain to go above compliance and provide that training? We have orientation on health and safety, new workers, orientation on health and safety for new agricultural workers. If you've ever been to it, I highly encourage you, that agricultural and horticultural safety center. It's a separate page, it's a separate landing page. That's where all of our agricultural resources are staffed, okay, or housed. What training, okay, videos, what training should be provided for temporary workers? Who's responsible? Shout out to a greenhouse down in Vineland, Jeffries Greenhouses. We collaborated with them a number of years ago on a video and article, okay, how and why to produce your own short training videos. It says for greenhouse growers, it's for anybody, okay? But, how you could use your phone to, take a short little video and I think in their video that just shows someone pushing a cart, okay, and then doing translation voiceover, then picking the predominant language there, whether it's Thai, whether it's Spanish, and being able to do that voiceover translation. I've been sharing that this year with a number of businesses that I had reached out to, and they were like, "Oh, that's like fantastic. That's exactly what I need." But what I pointed out to them was short little snippets. Don't be thinking, this is an opportunity for me to create like a 1-hour orientation, short, small little snippets, right? That then, the supervisor could show that to the workers. Additionally, web resources, vulnerable workers, health and safety awareness. It's an article, what we've kind of talked about this morning in regards to licensing requirements. What should I be training in regards to new worker orientation checklist and temporary help agencies. And with that, I wasn't monitoring the chat, but I did see some stuff pop up as I was presenting. I will ask if there's any questions. It looks like most of the questions were coming from a ESA, Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. It looks like some of them have been answered.
Yep. So Katya and I have been answering the questions as they came through. But there is another question here. Yes, all of those resources will be sent in an email after this webinar. Welcome. So Katya, thank you so much for answering those questions so quickly. Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, that's my pleasure.
Yeah, so again, the PowerPoint presentation will not be shared, but Sigma Workforce, and Tanya mentioned it, all resources that were referenced in the PowerPoint will be sent out in an email to those attendees that joined today. And the session was recorded, and that will be posted, I think it's usually a couple weeks afterwards on our website. Just because on the page for Safety Connections, it's like upcoming Safety Connections and previous Safety Connections, and they're recorded. So if there's any information within today's session, whether it's from the ministry or from what I talked about in regards to tips and resources, once it is, posted, feel free to share with, others at your business or, other, colleagues within the system or whatever that maybe they didn't have an opportunity to attend today.
I did want to kind of highlight something, if that was okay, Jay and Katya. Wonder if there's a bit of confusion around the difference between the agriculture stream program and then temp help agencies, and if those differences just can be clarified, because I think maybe some of the questions coming through may have been referencing, and I could be wrong, the agri stream program.
Yeah, so I'll go first and then I'll let Katya jump in. But when we're talking about temporary foreign agricultural workers coming, let's say, through the Ag Stream program, these are workers that, the employer, right, has gone through and, determine with that particular country, whether it's Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, Mexico as an example, these workers are coming in for, it could be 8 months. When we're talking about, temporary help agencies, this is, okay, I brought in 40 workers from Jamaica. Harvest is going a little bit quicker than I thought. I need more workers on site. I'm not going to reach out to the farms program or try and get workers here quickly through the Ag Stream program. I now jump on a website and I'm looking for a temporary help agency and contacting them and saying, I need 8 workers for the next 5 days. And that's where, with today's session, if I'm reaching out to that temporary help agency located in London that's going to be supplying me with those workers, I need to ensure that they're registered, right? They're licensed, and then that where it becomes the employer's responsibility to determine how are those workers going to be trained.
Thank you, Jay. Is a question that just popped up in the chat.
Ethical recruiters in the temporary foreign worker program wish to provide employers with resources of this type, i.e. create PowerPoints. Yeah, I mean, you can look at some of the resources that'll be sent out after the fact and to consider, the orientation checklist, and, it's all about like working together. Right. So if you, want to create something and then, say to, that particular business, hey, look what we've created. Right. Because I think that's the challenge, is that a lot of businesses don't know necessarily where to start. And to the person that posed that question, I think that's a great idea, because one thing that I do, I go to a lot of farms, right, throughout the course of the year. And I do a lot of work where I go in and do, it's a safety awareness session. It's a 2-hour reminder refresher. Okay. And I always do this, right, just for my peace of mind, and to kind of point this out to the employer and say, bang on you, Mr. Employer or Mrs. Employer. But I'll ask, how many new workers do I have here this year? And what I'm getting at is, how many workers do I have here? This is their first time from Jamaica, Mexico, Trinidad, Tobago. Okay. And then I'll get that number. But then I'll ask, how many workers, it's their first time here at the farm, at this particular farm? And a couple of hands will go up. Okay. So then I'll ask those individuals. So you've been in Ontario before, correct? Yes. Okay. Another greenhouse? Yes. Did you get this type of training in that particular greenhouse? No. And you should see the look on some of the employers' face, like, what? And I'm going, no, that's common. Because not everybody is doing what they're supposed to do, right? And I've said to some of those workers, hey, you know what? When you guys go into town on Friday night to get groceries, or you go to the local restaurant to have a pizza, and other workers are coming from other farms, tell your fellow countrymen about what you learned at this particular session, right? Because those workers need to understand, right? And very similar, workers within, workers that are within a temporary help agency, they need to understand what their three basic rights are, right? And that they're entitled to health and safety as well. Not having that mindset of, oh, they're only going to be here for a day. We all know, I said it earlier, worst case scenario, yep, they come in the morning, accident occurs in the afternoon. Oh, and I forgot to do the training. I think that's a Katia. Oh, this is the big one.
So I will just kind of do a quick read and see what I can help you with off the top of my head. For the first question, do we need to list all addresses where we are providing care? Example, our client's home. Do we need to list all these addresses? Do all these addresses need to be listed on our application? So the addresses you're going to need to provide are your own business addresses, not your assignment locations. So say your office, or if you primarily work out of your home, you don't have an office, that would be your home address. So the wage noted is far above the minimum wage. Does this mean that home care agencies need to be now paying our staff $28.39 plus an hour? So that wage is in reference to the median national wage in Ontario, and that applies specifically to the recruiter term and condition. So it doesn't really have anything to do with the temporary help agencies. That's just to help make a determination if you need to provide a security with your recruiter license. So the idea there is to kind of pinpoint workers that are going to be going into less vulnerable sectors and who are going to be less likely to be in need of the security from their employer. So I don't think that applies to you if you're just coming from a temporary help agency perspective. If we have agreements with our staff that do not have end dates, example, we hired them with the intention of having them on our team for as long as they will stay with our team, do we need to obtain this license? So the temporary help agency rules apply to temporary and permanent work. So I do not think that would change your requirement with regard to licensing. Can a rep from the government team responsible for the temp help agency licensing team comment on when those who did apply for this license will receive any communication? I applied July 28th and have not yet to even receive an email confirming anything, and it shows for my company among many home healthcare agencies that we are still pending in the process. Yeah, so you would have received a confirmation email with your license submission. This may have gone into your spam folder, so my first recommendation would be to check your spam folder just for that communication. And then if you have any concerns regarding the processing timeline for your application, I would recommend that you send us an email. I put it in the chat a couple times, but I'll just paste that in there again for you real quick. And you can just kind of share your concerns with us, and we'll try and look at helping you get assigned to a reviewer. And generally, once you're assigned to a reviewer, it takes approximately 2 weeks, as long as everything is in compliance. So I hope that was just kind of all off the top of my head, but I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions at this time in the chat.
Well, if there's no further questions, I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. And as it's been communicated multiple times, probably sometime later this afternoon for those attendees, there will be an email sent from WSPS with the numerous and multiple resources that was referenced. And I highly encourage individuals to check out that agricultural, horticultural landing page, and to check out that video article that we collaborated with Jeffrey's Greenhouses on how to create your small, short safety videos and do voiceover translation. There's tools and resources that are there, so let's use them, let's utilize them, and ensure, right, as employers and for the workers, that we're doing the proper thing and ensuring that at the end of the day, everyone goes home safe at the end of their shift.
Okay,